President Bush says we're still under attack, with 4 additional suspected cases of anthrax today. The post office says it cannot absolutely guarantee your mail is safe. What is your government doing about this? The new Homeland Security Director brings us the latest in an exclusive CBS Evening News interview. A Pentagon warning the Taliban may fight back with a monstrous act against their own people. And millions of refugees, hungry, sick, and desperate with winter ahead.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York.
Good evening. The White House said today your mail is overwhelmingly safe. The Postal Service said it cannot absolutely guarantee that and recommended that if you're worried, you wash your hands after you handle your mail. And as still more suspected cases of anthrax were announced, everyone in America wants to know, what is the government going to do about all this? We put that question to the Director of Homeland Security, and we will have the answer for you in a moment. But we begin our coverage tonight with CBS's John Roberts on the latest suspected infections.
Postal workers marched into a hospital in Washington today, anxious because 4 more of their colleagues are in the hospital tonight with suspected cases of inhaled anthrax. Angry that they were given antibiotics but not tests for anthrax exposure.
How do I know what I got? They stopped swabbing people. They stopped testing people.
As of tonight, workers at all 36 Washington postal stations are taking antibiotics. And after a second employee of the New York Post newspaper today tested positive for the skin form of anthrax, postal officials said they can't guarantee the mail is safe.
At this point in time, the mail has a potential risk.
Anybody who puts poison in mail is a terrorist.
President Bush today vowed to find whomever is responsible, even as investigators searched for the source of anthrax at a facility that screens White House mail. Sources tell CBS News the Secret Service does not believe any anthrax was sent to the president and expects that a letter probably picked up spores as it went through sorting machines at the contaminated Brentwood postal station. The White House also today announced a deal to buy 100 million doses of anthrax-fighting Cipro antibiotic at reduced prices as a protective stockpile. But from a conference on public health in Atlanta today, criticism that the president's strategy is misguided, spending money on drugs and vaccines at the expense of frontline detection and rapid response.
The first responders are the state and local health departments, and that part can't be ignored if we're going to have a strong public health system that is truly part of the national defense.
The Postal Service today announced that it was taking new defensive measures to protect the American public with the purchase of the first new machines to sterilize mail through irradiation. It hopes to begin installing them in high-risk postal stations sometime next month. Dan?
John Roberts reporting live from the White House. These were not the first reassurances given to postal workers concerned about being exposed to anthrax on the job, and the latest reassurances did not end the postal workers' concerns. Far from it. CBS's Lee Cowan reports why.
In Trenton, New Jersey, the anthrax learning curve has been dangerously steep. Even though workers at this facility were initially told not to worry, investigators announced they're now finding anthrax in 1 out of every 3 places they test. Odds that have other New Jersey postal workers unwilling to gamble.
Who wants to be the one that is the one that catches it? Who wants to be the one that inhales it and then, okay, now we're going to test everybody? Nobody wants to be that person.
Much of the mail diverted from that tainted Trenton facility is now being sorted here at another nearby plant. And although workers have been asked to be tested, the response has been the same. Don't worry. Until there's a definite word, Danielle Molino says she won't return to work.
You're now going to risk your job, essentially, by not going back because you're so afraid of what might be in there.
Well, I think my life is worth more than my job. I can always find another job.
Legally, postal workers can't strike, but union officials in New York are now warning postal authorities that sick-outs are possible.
We are telling them, if they feel unsafe working in these facilities, then they should not come to work.
In New York, where no mail carriers are known to be infected, the Postal Service will be offering Cipro to some 7,000 employees. But it's being given without any testing, precisely what the government warned against just a week ago. All across the country, the response to anthrax seems as confusing as the disease. Although gloves and masks have been provided, many postal workers choose not to wear them, and those who do complain they aren't trained how to use them. In Hawaii, those running sorting equipment were initially told they couldn't wear gloves for fear they might get caught in the machinery. Some call them growing pains in the new war on terror, but health officials admit these pains can kill. So far, New Jersey health officials haven't decided whether to do more sophisticated environmental testing, but few in the post office would argue that more isn't better than less. Lee Cowan, CBS News, Hamilton, New Jersey.
With public concern and criticism growing about the government's response and lack of response to the anthrax attacks, I talked one-on-one late today with the new Director of Homeland Security, Tom Ridge. Mr. Director, Governor, you just came out of a rather hastily arranged meeting with President Bush. What's the news out of it?
Well, we were talking a little bit about the response of the public health community to the anthrax crisis. We think they've done an exceptional job. Obviously, we mourn the loss of some lives. And one of the things that we're challenged with is that there aren't too many clinical studies on anthrax, and so we are kind of learning as we go along.
It hasn't been that long ago you were a governor, and you know the feeling among the public that Washington is frequently out of touch. Now, when you say that you and the President are very pleased with the response to anthrax, you must be aware that a lot of people around the country are saying, listen, they bobbled this thing in the beginning, they haven't done a good job.
Well, I would say very respectfully, even though there's a tremendous amount of anxiety around anthrax, the public health community, we believe, in this country has saved hundreds, if not thousands of lives, and we are learning as we go along. One of these challenges is non-state terrorism, and one of the challenges within that effort is dealing with this anthrax delivery through the mail system.
Mr. Director, you're aware that rightly or wrongly, there have been people who have expressed outrage about what they see is the inequity between the way people in the Congress and their staffs were handled in the early stages of the anthrax threat and the blue-collar workers who work at the post office. Would you address yourself to that?
Yes, I will. I don't think that the healthcare professionals at either site, either dealing with the challenges on the Senate office building or at Brentwood, did anything other than to exercise their best scientific judgment based on what they knew at the time. I'm absolutely, positively, 1,000% convinced that they weren't looking at the collar of the shirts, whether it was a white collar or blue collar challenge. They were looking at a medical challenge, and they did their very, very best.
And you do or do not categorically deny that preferential treatment was given to politicians and those who work for politicians?
I just, Dan, I regret that whole notion has come into the public discussion. I don't think if you saw and you talked to the men and women involved in the public health delivery system, the doctors, the emergency technicians, they are dealing with lives every single day and the potential for fatalities and the potential to save lives. And they make those very difficult decisions based on very little scientific evidence. It wasn't until a couple weeks ago that the public health delivery system even had to think about the challenge, the 21st century challenge of anthrax delivery, spores of anthrax being delivered and disseminated in the mail.
Mr. Director, I want to pick up follow up on something you said earlier. You said we're dealing with 21st century non-state sponsored terrorism.
Right.
Is that the collective judgment of yourself and the President and those around him that what we are dealing with is non-state sponsored terrorism?
Well, it's pretty clear that the non-state terrorists were involved in turning airplanes into missiles, and there's no credible evidence linking the anthrax dissemination to bin Laden. But a lot of people probably have reached their own conclusions before the FBI and the Attorney General have concluded their investigations. And that is more my opinion than anybody else's, but I think it is an opinion that, at least for the time being, absent other information, is probably shared by a lot of Americans. It isn't just coincidental.
Experts in biowarfare say there are really only 3 countries capable of producing the kind of anthrax that has come through the mails here: Russia, Iraq, and Great Britain, besides the United States. Now, does that or does it not narrow the list of suspects of where this came down pretty finely?
Well, it's my understanding, Dan, that there have been that getting access to anthrax spores isn't necessarily limited to the public operation of 3 or 4 different countries. I mean, the spores themselves in different forms are available in research and can be extracted. It certainly narrows internationally the options if somebody was to go in and secure some samples from a public laboratory or a military establishment.
Those Americans who are at home and saying, well, I hear what the director is saying, but I'm a little concerned about my mail at home. What say you?
Be alert, be on guard, be cautious, and if you follow those tips, you can feel secure that if you do your job and the post office does their job, we hold the possibility of exposure to a minimum.
Governor, Mr. Director, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
And editor's note, perspective is vital on the anthrax story. In a country of 285 million Americans, the number of confirmed infections is 12. Of those 12, 3 are known to have died.